Hey, that's going to be a quick video, but I just wanted to create a summary over all the forms of data binding we learned and to give you a document where you could look up the individual forms if something is not quite clear, if you just want to reassure yourself. Now, I'm not going to create this document with you, but I'm going to attach this to this lecture, and it only contains things we already used or saw throughout this course, so nothing too new there. Now let's hop into this document. So it starts with interpolation, where it says this was inserted with interpolation syntax. And if we have a look at my template here, which is an external HTML file, I'm inserting something here with string interpolation, namely this interpolation string. Now in my data binding component, it's exactly this property which gets inserted here. Now next thing is property binding. Here we're binding to the source property of an image element. Now the cool thing is this is binding to the default Angular 2 logo, but if I were to, let's say, search for a flower picture, let's take any flower picture we find here. Hopefully this will work. Copy this into here. Well, we changed the picture because this is bound, as you can see in the source code. This is bound to the source property of my image. And here's my input field where I just have this dummy key up method to update the UI whenever it changes. And in my source property here, I'm binding to that image source value, where image source is just a local variable bound to that input field here. So that's that. Now attribute binding, I admit, is something we haven't talked about, and that is because there aren't that great of examples out there. Attribute binding is a very rare exception included in Angular 2, where we're actually binding to a specific attribute of an HTML element. Now, when we're binding to source for this image, this might look like the source attribute of that image, right? But that is not the case. This is not the same as this source, which is a default attribute. It's a specific property introduced by Angular 2, which Angular 2 says is, for example, available for our image elements. But it is, as I said, an Angular 2 property for the image element. It's not the source attribute natively built into with HTML. But there are some very rare exceptions, for example, cold span for tables, which are attributes of that element, and we're binding to that element directly and not to an Angular 2 property. Now we would access this by using the squared bracket syntax and then attr dot and then just the name, cold span, for example, if we were to bind to that. Now, why didn't I go into detail there? Because it's a very rare exception. In almost all the cases, we will bind to properties or to properties of HTML elements or to properties of directives or components. But be aware that, for example, for cold span, we would be binding directly to the attribute itself. Well, we got the class and style binding we also learned about in the first section, where we had this class dot and this style dot notation here. Now, as I told you, and as I have written down here, this is really just an alternative way of writing ng-class or ng-style and then a JavaScript object with, well, the class or style name or style property name, and then the true or false if the class should be attached, or the value for the style if using ng-style. So that are really just shortcuts bindings. Then we have event binding here, where we're firing an alert here, and where we're using these parentheses syntax. So we're updating this, and I'm now saving it when I click it. So this is on key up and this is saved on click, basically. We have this mouse over thing going on here. So if we scroll down, we can see it. We got this mouse over and mouse out so that we fire this on toggle over or on toggle hover method in both cases, when we hover over it as well as when we move our mouse pointer away from this element. And now in my data binding component, we got this on toggle hover method, which basically just each time rewards the state of this is mouse over property, which then again defines our styling of this hover over me. So here it defines if we should attach this highlight class or not. So that is what happens here. By the way, because I did it, here we can change the value for our drop down, and this will change our styling, or in this case, if we select blue, it says this text only appears if blue is chosen. And well, this is done through using obviously also property binding to, or event binding to update our UI. But then here we're just conditionally applying different styles and classes. So that's something we covered. Now we get two-way data binding. Well, that isn't something we would not know yet, but here again we can see how it updates in the text here if we enter something in the input fields there. And then we have the binding to custom properties and custom events, as we did in the videos, the latest videos we were doing here. So that's really just an overview, just a summary over all the various forms of data binding and how it all works together. And as I said, it will be attached to this lecture so that you just have an opportunity of looking this up and reassuring yourself on some points which might be unclear, or if you just want to see some actual code using that data binding. So in the next video, we'll start for an actual project for this section, and I'm happy to be there with you. So see you in the next videos. Bye.